My daughter-in-law smirked when my son signed his entire inheritance over to her, thinking she had finally won. She had no idea I had spent 6 months preparing for the moment I would place those rusted keys on the dinner table. They were not just keys to property, but to dirty secrets and debt. By the time they realized the trap had snapped shut, I was the only one holding the way out of their personal hell. My name is Evelyn Harper, and at 67 years old, I have learned that silence is often the loudest sound in an empty house. I sat at my kitchen table in Ravenbrook, Ohio, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My short grey hair was cut practical and close to the scalp, a necessity for a woman who used to manage the night shift at Silver Creek Provisions. Even now, with my back aching and my hands trembling from arthritis, I still picked up part-time shifts there just to cover the cost of my blood pressure medication. It has been 6 months since Thomas died. A massive stroke took him before he even hit the floor, leaving me alone in this drafty suburban house that feels too large for one person. We had built a life here, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. Thomas was a careful man. He left behind a decent life insurance policy, a few small investments, and our pride and joy, a lake house up in Michigan where we spent our summers. I thought that legacy would be the bedrock for our son, Lucas, and the grandchildren I hoped to one day hold. Lucas is 38 now, a good man, but perhaps too soft for this sharp-edged world. He works as an accountant for Northline Transit. He has always been good with numbers, but not so good with people. That is where Madison comes in. My daughter-in-law is a bright, energetic woman who works in human resources for Pioneer Vista Homes. She knows exactly what to say to make people feel important, and she knows exactly how to get what she wants. I realized just how much she wanted yesterday, sitting in the stiff wooden chair at our family attorney's office. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I watched as the lawyer read through Thomas's will. Everything was supposed to go to Lucas, with the understanding that he would look after the estate. But before the ink was dry on the acknowledgement, Madison leaned in close to my son. Her hand rested on his forearm, her manicured nails digging slightly into his shirt. "Lucas, honey," she whispered, her voice low but audible in the quiet room. "If we put everything in my name, it will be much better for the tax brackets. You know the investment portfolio I have access to at work requires the assets to be primary to the employee. We could double this in 5 years." I saw Lucas hesitate. He looked at the pen, then at her. "Are you sure?" Lucas asked. "Trust me," Madison said, smiling that bright, camera-ready smile. "It is just paperwork. It is for our future." I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and slap the pen out of his hand. But I sat frozen, my years of polite Midwestern upbringing chaining me to the chair. I watched my son sign the papers. In 5 minutes, 40 years of Thomas's hard work was transferred solely to Madison Harper. When Lucas looked up and saw the expression on my face, he offered a weak, apologetic smile. "Mom, I trust my wife," he said, his voice faltering slightly as he used those pauses I knew so well since he was a boy. "We are a team, you know. It is all the same pot." "Of course," I managed to say, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. "As long as you are happy." Lucas. When we walked out into the parking lot, Madison was beaming. She hugged the folder of documents to her chest like a newborn baby. She hugged Lucas, then gave me a quick, distracted peck on the cheek. "Don't worry." "Mom," she said, We will take care of everything. But as I drove away in my rusting sedan, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the lawyer standing in the doorway of his building. He was not looking at the happy couple. He was looking at me, and in his eyes, I saw a flash of pity that made my stomach turn. Tonight, the house is unbearable. I cannot sleep. I stand in the living room, looking at the framed photograph of the three of us from last Christmas. Lucas looks tired. Madison looks radiant. And I look fading. I try to tell myself I am just a bitter old woman, jealous of her daughter-in-law's youth and confidence. I try to tell myself that modern marriages work differently, that titles on deeds do not matter as long as there is love. But as the wind rattles the loose frame of the front window, a cold knot of suspicion tightens in my chest. Why did she need it all? Why did she need to be the sole owner of the lake house, the insurance money, the bonds? I am just overthinking it. I whisper to the empty room. But deep down, I know the difference between paranoia and instinct. The paint on this family portrait is fresh, but I can already smell the rot starting underneath the canvas. 3 months later, the silence in my house was replaced by a low, humming anxiety that I could feel in my teeth. Lucas came over on a Tuesday evening, looking far older than his 38 years. The dark circles under his eyes were new, and he kept rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous tic he had developed in high school. He sat at the kitchen table, declining the pot roast I had saved for him. "Mom, Madison has found these incredible investment opportunities in real estate," Lucas said, his voice sounding rehearsed, as if he were reading from a script. "But we need liquidity. We were thinking, we need to rent out the lake house. Short-term rentals are huge right now. It is foolish to let it sit empty when it could be making money." I nodded slowly, sipping my tea. "If you think that is best." Lucas. But the following week, the property tax bill for the Michigan house arrived in my mailbox. I sliced open the envelope, expecting to see the usual names listed: Lucas Harper and Evelyn Harper. My breath caught in my throat. The owner was listed simply as Madison Harper. I drove straight to their house. Madison answered the door in a silk blouse, her phone pressed between her ear and shoulder. She ushered me in with a wave, ending her call with a sharp laugh. When I showed her the bill, she did not even blink. She poured herself a glass of sparkling water, avoiding my gaze by focusing intensely on the lemon slice she was cutting. "Oh, Mum, don't worry about that paperwork," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt synthetic. The lawyer insisted on it. "It is about liability protection. If a renter slips and falls, we don't want them coming after your pension or Lucas's salary. It is just safer this way." "But nobody asked me," I said, my voice quiet. "We didn't want to burden you with the legal jargon," she replied, finally looking at me, though her eyes seemed to focus on my forehead rather than my pupils. "You trust us." Right, the next day, during my lunch break at Silver Creek Provisions, I sat in the break room with Rosa Martinez. Rosa was 55, tough as old leather, and had spent 20 years investigating fraud before the system burned her out. She listened to me while peeling an orange, her brow furrowing deeper with every sentence. "Evelyn, listen to me," Rosa said, pointing a piece of orange rind at me. "Transferring a joint asset entirely to the wife's name without a trust or a post-nup to protect the husband. That is a giant red flag. Huge. In this country, people don't move assets like that unless they are hiding something or planning an exit. If Lucas isn't protecting himself, he is being played. Rosa's words stuck in my mind like a splinter. I started watching them like a hawk. I noticed that whenever we went out for a casual dinner, Madison held the credit cards. When the bank called about a transaction, Madison answered. Lucas, who used to be so proud of his job at North Line Transit, now stayed silent whenever money was mentioned, shrinking into his chair. A few weeks later, I stopped by their house unannounced to drop off a blueberry coffee cake. The front door was unlocked. As I stepped into the foyer, I heard shouting coming from the living room. I am tired of this. Madison. I am tired of feeling like I own nothing, absolutely nothing in this house or out of it. Lucas's voice was ragged, cracking with emotion. You said this was temporary. Keep your voice down. Madison hissed back. Do you want to ruin everything we are building? I stepped into the archway of the living room. Lucas. The silence that followed was immediate and terrifying. Lucas spun around, his face flushed red. Upon seeing me, a mask of forced cheerfulness slammed down over his features. Mom, he said, though his voice was too high, too tight. We were just debating the kitchen renovation. I really hate this backsplash. Madison was smoother. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Lucas's chest, effectively claiming him. He gets so worked up over tiles. Madison laughed, though her eyes were cold. But guess what? Mum, thanks to the restructuring, we are closing on a duplex downtown next week. Passive income. Aren't you proud of how well Lucas is doing? I looked at my son. He looked like a man drowning in plain sight. Yes. I lied, handing over the cake. Very proud. I left their house with a smile plastered on my face, but as I walked to my car, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Ohio autumn. The house looked perfect from the street, with its manicured lawn and fresh paint. But I could hear the foundation cracking. And I knew, with a mother's instinct, that my son was not just losing his money, he was losing himself. The call came at 6 o'clock in the morning, a shrill sound that sliced through the quiet of my bedroom like a knife. When I picked up the receiver, Madison's voice was on the other end. It was trembling, yet there was a strange, icy precision to her words, as if she were reading a prepared statement. Lucas had collapsed at his office at North Line Transit. He was in the emergency room with severe chest pains and difficulty breathing. By the time I arrived at the hospital, the air felt thick enough to choke on. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency that reminded me of the nights I spent waiting for Thomas to die. The doctor, a young man who looked too tired for his age, delivered the news that made my knees weak. Lucas had developed significant coronary artery disease. His heart was under immense strain. The doctor used words like lifestyle changes, stress management, and medication adherence. But all I heard were the echoes of my husband's diagnosis 20 years ago. Madison was performing the role of the terrified wife with Oscar-worthy dedication. She stood right next to the doctor, her notebook open, scribbling down every syllable he uttered. She nodded fervently, her hand resting protectively on Lucas's shoulder, effectively creating a physical wall between my son and me. We will do absolutely anything, Madison said, her voice hitching dramatically. I will make sure he takes every pill. I will handle his diet. You don't have to worry about a single thing. Doctor. I felt like a ghost in the room, hovering at the edges, unseen and unheard. I excused myself to get a cup of coffee from the vending machine down the hall. desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the room. As I turned the corner near the waiting area, I heard a familiar voice. Madison was standing near the window, her back to me, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, the paperwork went through last week," she whispered, her voice low and devoid of the tears she had just displayed. "I have the confirmation number. It is the new policy with West Prairie Mutual. If something happens, that amount covers everything and leaves a surplus." She paused, listening to the person on the other end, then added, "I know. I am handling it." I backed away before she could turn around, my heart hammering against my ribs harder than it had for any of my own scares. When I returned to the room and asked her about the insurance I had overheard, her face shifted instantly into a mask of innocent concern. "Oh, Mom," that she said, offering a weak, brave smile. "That is just a supplemental policy the company required for the mortgage on the new investment property. It is just a safety net. We are just trying to be responsible adults." Later that day, I met Rosa during her break at the warehouse. When I mentioned the name of the insurance company, Rosa stopped eating her sandwich. She looked at me with a seriousness that chilled my blood. "West Prairie Mutual?" Rosa asked. "Evelyn, you need to find that policy number. You don't buy a high-value policy from them unless you are expecting a payout. A new policy combined with a sudden heart condition. That is not a safety net. That is a lottery ticket." The warning festered in my mind like an infection. The next time I visited Lucas at home, I watched the ritual with a new, terrifying clarity. He was sitting on the sofa, looking pale and breathless, like a man whose life force was being slowly siphoned away. Madison walked in with a glass of water and a small plastic cup containing 3 pills. "Here you go. Baby," she cooed. "This will help you relax." Lucas did not even look at the bottle. He did not ask what they were. He just took them from her hand and swallowed them down. I feel so tired lately," Lucas murmured, his eyes drooping. "My chest feels like there is a cinder block on it." "Shh. Just sleep," Madison said, stroking his hair. "I have got everything under control." I left their house feeling nauseous. As I walked to my car, I noticed a vehicle parked 2 houses down. It was a black sedan, engine idling. A man in a leather jacket was leaning against the hood, staring directly at Lucas's front door. He was not a neighbor. He had the hard, hungry look of a predator. When he saw me watching him, he calmly got into his car and drove away slowly, without breaking eye contact. Driving home. The grip on the steering wheel hurt my arthritic knuckles. The pieces were falling into a picture I did not want to see. My son's heart was failing. A new insurance policy was waiting to pay out, and wolves were circling the driveway. The money was gone. The property was gone. And now, I realized with a jolt of pure terror, my son was just an obstacle standing between Madison and a fortune. I decided to go back to the source. I drove to the brick building downtown where Gordon Pike, Thomas's estate attorney, kept his office. I told the receptionist I needed copies of the final settlement papers for my own records, a harmless request from a grieving widow. But when I sat across from Gordon, I saw him shift uncomfortably in his leather chair. He was a man who preferred easy signatures, not questions. "Gordon," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need to understand exactly where the liquid assets went. The insurance payout from Thomas, the bond maturity funds. I don't see them in the main ledger." Gordon cleared his throat. adjusting his glasses. Well, Evelyn, per Lucas's instructions shortly after the funeral, those assets were liquidated and moved. They were placed into a new joint investment trust. Joint, I asked. Yes, Gordon said, looking at a file rather than at me. Between Lucas and Madison, it is structured as a joint tenancy with right of survivorship. And, well, the primary beneficiary listed on the trust, in the event of both passing, is Madison's sister. There is no provision for you, Evelyn, or for any future grandchildren. I felt the blood drain from my face. So if Lucas dies tomorrow, Madison gets 100%, automatically. That is how the law works, Gordon replied quietly. It is standard for married couples. But it was done very quickly. Within 48 hours of the probate closing, my next stop was Liberty Crown Bank. I had banked there for 30 years, and the branch manager, Sarah, had known Thomas since high school. She was not supposed to show me Lucas's accounts, but when I mentioned my concerns about identity theft regarding Thomas's old linked accounts, she turned the screen slightly. I shouldn't show you this. Evelyn, Sarah whispered, glancing at the security camera. But I saw some activity that looked odd. We flagged it as potential restructuring. I leaned in. I saw a series of wire transfers. $5,000, $3,000, $7,000. All of them leaving Lucas's account and going to a recipient labeled Atlas Recovery Group. Atlas Recovery, I asked. Is that a medical bill? It sounds like a collection agency, Sarah murmured. Or a debt buyer. We usually see names like that when someone is in deep trouble with high-risk loans. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, forcing the pieces of the puzzle together until the picture made me sick. The assets were moved to Madison's name. A massive new life insurance policy had been purchased. Money was bleeding out to a mysterious group called Atlas Recovery. And in the middle of it all was my son, his heart failing, stressed beyond belief, taking pills handed to him by the woman who stood to inherit a fortune the moment his heart stopped beating. I called Rosa immediately. When I explained the Atlas Recovery detail, her voice on the line became hard as flint. Evelyn, listen to me, Rosa said. I saw this when I was working fraud. It is the desperation play. A guy gets into deep debt, maybe gambling, maybe bad investments. The loan sharks start circling. He can't pay. So, he becomes worth more dead than alive. Sometimes the wife doesn't know. But sometimes she is the one holding the stopwatch. I dialed Lucas's number. My hand was shaking so hard I dropped the phone twice before connecting. He answered on the third ring, his voice sounding hollow. Mom, he said. Lucas, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I went to the bank. Who is Atlas Recovery, please? Tell me the truth. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing, heavy and ragged. I made some mistakes. Mom, Lucas whispered, his voice cracking. I tried to fix things with some investments, but they went bad. I had to borrow from people I shouldn't have. I didn't want Madison to worry. But now, it is out of control. We can fix this. I pleaded. I have the house. I can sell the car. No, Lucas snapped, then lowered his voice instantly. It is too much. You don't understand. The interest. It doubles every month. There is only one way out now. The insurance. It is the only way to clean the slate. Suddenly, I heard a door creak open in the background of the call. Lucas Madison's voice chirped in the background. Who are you talking to? Just work. Honey, Lucas said, his tone shifting instantly to a forced calm. I have to go. Mum, I will call you later. The line went dead. I did not cry. The time for tears had passed. I drove to the stationery store and bought a thick, black notebook. I sat at my kitchen table and started writing. I recorded the date and time of the call. I wrote down Atlas Recovery Group. I wrote down Gordon Pike, beneficiary clause. I wrote down every pill I had seen him take. My son was being erased. Every financial decision made in the last 6 months had been designed to strip him of ownership while he was alive and maximize his value when he was dead. To Madison, and perhaps even to himself. He was no longer a husband or a son. He was a walking check waiting to be cashed. But they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten his mother was watching. And I was done being a spectator. I parked my sedan in the driveway, clutching a plastic bag of homemade lasagna in one hand and my black notebook in the other. I had told myself I was just going over to check on Lucas, but the weight of the notebook against my hip felt less like a journal and more like a loaded weapon. I needed to stop the bleeding before it was too late. The front door was slightly ajar. As I reached for the handle, I heard Madison's voice drifting from the kitchen, sharp and complaining. Lucas, this copay is ridiculous, Madison said, the sound of paper crumpling following her words. $80 for blood thinners. We are bleeding cash just to keep you stable. Honest to God. If the worst happens, at least the new policy means I won't be left destitute. You don't need to feel guilty about that security. My hand froze on the doorknob. She was talking about his death as if it were a line item on a budget spreadsheet. I waited until I heard the sliding glass door open and Madison step out into the backyard to take a call. I pushed the door open and walked straight to the living room where Lucas was sitting, his head in his hands. Lucas, I said, skipping the pleasantries. He jumped, his face pale and sweaty. Mom, I didn't hear you come in. I sat down on the coffee table directly in front of him, ignoring the boundaries of personal space. I opened my notebook to the page where I had written the name Sarah gave me at the bank. Atlas Recovery Group, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I know about the transfers. Lucas, I know about the debt. Tell me the truth. Lucas looked at me, and for a second, I saw the little boy who used to scrape his knees, but that boy was buried under layers of terror. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. I tried to fix it, Lucas stammered, his breathing shallow. I leveraged the investments. I thought I could double it. But I lost it. All of it. The interest rates they are charging me. It is impossible. They said they would come to the house. We can fix this, I pleaded, grabbing his cold hands. I have $10,000 in my savings. I can sell my car. We can sell Thomas's watch collection. We will go to the police and negotiate with these people. Please, don't treat your life like a transaction. Lucas pulled his hands away, shaking his head slowly. The look in his eyes was dead. Mom, you don't understand, he whispered. It is too much. Millions. The only way to clear the ledger is the insurance. It is already arranged. Madison knows. She knows it is the only way she survives this. Before I could scream at him, the sliding door opened. Madison walked in, spotting the tension immediately. Her face transformed instantly from annoyance to a practiced, sugary warmth. Evelyn, You stayed for dinner, Madison chirped, walking over to place a hand on Lucas's shoulder, her fingers digging in slightly. We were just talking about the future. You know, Lucas worries so much. But I told him, if he is not around, I promise I will take care of you just like my own mother. The bile rose in my throat. I stood up, my legs shaking. Is that right? I asked, my voice hard. If you care so much. Madison, why is my name nowhere on that new policy? Why is there no trust fund set up for any future grandchildren? If Lucas dies, you get everything, every single cent. Madison's smile did not falter, but her eyes went flat and cold. Lucas and I decided that together, she said, her tone icy. We are a married couple. That is our money. It is not a family potluck. I looked at my son, begging him to say something, to defend me, to defend himself. Lucas, I asked. He looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Mom, please, don't make this a big thing. Madison knows what is best for the finances. Just let it go. He was pushing me out. He was choosing the woman who was waiting for him to die over the mother trying to keep him alive. Dinner was a silent, suffocating affair. I barely touched the food. When I finally stood up to leave, Madison walked me to the front porch. She closed the door behind her, cutting us off from Lucas. The fake smile vanished. She leaned in close, smelling of expensive perfume and rot. Listen to me. Evelyn, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. If you keep stirring the pot, if you keep stressing him out with these questions, you are going to trigger another episode. With his heart condition, stress is fatal. Do you want to be the one who kills him? Because if you don't back off, that is exactly what you will be. I stared at her, stunned by the sheer brutality of her threat. She opened the door and went back inside without another word. I walked to my car, tears streaming down my face. I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, sobbing until my chest ached. But as I turned the key in the ignition and felt the old engine rumble to life, the tears stopped. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. They thought I was just a confused old woman. They thought they could use Lucas's guilt and my silence to pave a road to a payday. But they were wrong. If the system my son, his wife, the lawyers, the debt was designed to kill him, then I would not play by their rules anymore. I shifted the car into drive. I was done begging. I was going to burn their plan to the ground, even if I had to destroy everything to do it. I arrived at Rosa's house with my black notebook clutched to my chest like a Bible. We sat at her small, scarred kitchen table, the overhead light casting long shadows across the piles of medical bills, bank statements, and scribbled notes I had accumulated. It did not look like a gossip session between friends. It looked like a command center. Rosa put on her reading glasses and ran a finger down the list of transactions I had copied from the bank manager's screen. When she stopped at Atlas Recovery Group, her face hardened. Evelyn. This is not good, Rosa said, taking a slow sip of her cold coffee. I remember this name from a case file 3 years ago. They are not a bank. They are what we used to call a shadow lender. They lend cash to people who have been rejected by everyone else, and the interest rates are criminal. If Lucas is paying them $5,000 a week, he is not paying down the principal. He is just paying the VIG to keep them from breaking his legs. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. So, he is desperate. Desperate people do desperate things, Rosa replied, looking me dead in the eye. But I have to ask you a question you are not going to like. Are you sure Madison is the one doing this to him, or is it possible they are playing this game together? The question hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. I thought back to Lucas's face, the resignation in his voice when he said there was only one way. He knows, I whispered, the realization settling in my stomach like a stone. He thinks he is a burden. He thinks he is a commodity. If he dies, the insurance pays off Atlas, and Madison gets to keep the lifestyle. Exactly, Rosa said, tapping the table with her pen. But here is the catch. Most policies have a suicide clause. If he takes his own life, they get 0. But if he dies of a heart attack, if he dies of natural causes exacerbated by stress, and maybe, just maybe, the wrong medication dosage, then West Prairie Mutual writes a check for $2 million. I finished her sentence, my voice trembling with rage. Bingo, Rosa said. And right now, we can't go to the police. You have a hunch and some stolen bank glimpses. Madison would spin it as a caring wife managing a sick husband. We need hard proof. We need to see the original documents. We need to know exactly what is in that house in Michigan and what is in that storage unit. I can't just ask for them. I said, no. Rosa agreed, a small, grim smile touching her lips. You have to take them. You have to stop being the victim. Evelyn, if you want to save your son, you have to break their plan. You have to make sure that his death is no longer profitable. I drove home in silence. The tears that had blinded me earlier were gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I was 67 years old. I was invisible to them, to Madison. I was just a nuisance, to Lucas. I was a guilt trip. They did not see me as a threat, and that was my greatest advantage. When I got to my house, I went straight to the kitchen. I pulled over a chair and climbed up to reach the cabinet above the refrigerator. There, pushed to the back behind a fondue pot we had not used since 1995, was an old Danish butter cookie tin. I sat at the table and pried the lid open. It smelled of rust and old metal. Inside was a chaotic jumble of keys from 40 years of marriage. Keys to cars we had sold 10 years ago. Keys to padlocks we had lost. And keys to doors that no longer existed. I dumped them out onto the tablecloth. The sound was a harsh, metallic crash. Okay, I said to the empty room. Let's see what still works. I began to sort them with the precision of a surgeon. I found the small brass key to the filing cabinet Thomas used to keep in the study, the same cabinet Lucas now had in his house. I found a spare key to the garage side door of Lucas's home, one he probably forgot I had. And then, at the bottom of the pile, I found it. The key to the back door of the lake house in Michigan. It was tarnished and old, but the teeth were sharp. I held it up to the light. Madison had changed the front locks and the digital codes. I was sure of it. But nobody changes the lock on a rusted screen door that looks like it hasn't been opened in a decade. I put 3 specific keys into my pocket and swept the rest back into the tin. My hands were steady. My heart was slow. I was done crying. I was preparing for a war, and I had just found my ammunition. The drive to the Michigan lake house took 4 hours. A grey ribbon of highway stretching under a sky that looked like bruised iron. I told myself I was just checking on the property. But as the tires crunched over the gravel driveway, I knew I was trespassing on my own life. Lucas and Madison had told me they were going up there for a relaxing weekend, but a quick drive past their house in Ravenbrook earlier that morning revealed their cars parked safely in their own driveway. They were in the city, busy with their secrets, leaving the lake house unguarded. I stepped out of the car. The wind off the water was biting, carrying the smell of decaying leaves and cold mud. The house stood silent among the pines. I walked to the front door, my hand tightening around the keyring. As I expected, my old key did not fit. They had installed a smart lock with a keypad, the kind that blinked with a mocking red light. Madison did not want me here, but Madison did not know about the mudroom door around the back. It was a heavy wooden door Thomas had installed himself back in 1995, securing it with an old-fashioned deadbolt that required a specific, long-toothed brass key. I waded through the tall, uncut grass, ignoring the burrs sticking to my coat. I slid the old key into the lock. For a second, it stuck, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, it turned. The air inside was stale and cold. I walked through the kitchen, and my chest tightened. The cozy, cluttered warmth Thomas and I had built was gone. The framed photos of Lucas catching his first base were missing from the mantel. The quilt my mother made was gone from the sofa. In their place were abstract paintings that looked like grey smears and a liquor cabinet stocked with bottles of whiskey that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. It felt less like a home and more like a hotel lobby designed for strangers. I went upstairs to the master bedroom. I opened the closet, pushing aside Madison's designer coats. There, tucked behind a loose floorboard in the back corner, was the small fireproof safe Thomas had bought years ago. I prayed Lucas had not changed the combination. Thomas had drilled it into his head. Never forget where you came from. I spun the dial. Right to 6, left to 12, right to 57. The date of our wedding. The mechanism clicked. A sound loud as a gunshot in the silent house. The door swung open. Inside, I found a stack of papers that made my blood run cold. There was a copy of the new West Prairie Mutual policy, listing the payout at $2 million. Beneath that was a deed of trust for a short-term, high-interest mortgage taken out on this very house just 3 weeks ago. And at the bottom lay a pair of small silver keys with a yellow tag reading Lockridge Storage Unit, B24. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the insurance papers that broke me. It was Lucas's handwriting, scrawled in blue ink on a piece of legal pad paper. Total debt, $1.2 million. Life insurance payout, $2 million. If I die, the debt is $0. Madison and Mom are safe. The word Mom had been violently crossed out with thick, dark lines. Next to it, in fresh ink, he had written, Madison decides. I slumped against the closet door, clutching the paper. I was not a mother to him anymore. I was a variable in an equation, and I had been cancelled out. He had accepted his death as a financial transaction, and he had trusted his wife to dole out mercy to me from his grave. The pain that washed over me was not hot or tearful. It was freezing. It hardened my veins like the ice forming on the lake outside. I put the papers back, took the storage keys, and closed the safe. On the drive back to Ohio, I stopped at the Lockridge facility on the outskirts of town. The silver key opened Unit B24 effortlessly. The metal door rolled up with a rattle. Inside, illuminated by the headlights of my car, were boxes of financial records and pieces of Thomas's old office furniture that I thought had been thrown away. In the center sat a small, grey metal box, locked tight. I did not have the key for that one yet, so I took a picture of the serial number on the lock and rolled the door down. That night, Rosa and I sat in her living room, surrounded by the photocopies I had made at a library on the way home. The only light came from a single table lamp. "Look at this," Rosa said, pointing to the mortgage document. They leveraged the lake house to pay the interest on the debt. But the principal is still growing. They are digging a hole so deep that the only way to fill it is with a body. "He crossed my name out," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. He actually crossed me out. He is scared." "Evelyn," Rosa said softly. "But Madison, she is betting on the outcome. They are funneling every asset into one pot so that when he drops, she scoops it all up. But you have something they don't think you have." "What is that?" I asked. "You have the map," Rosa replied, tapping the picture of the keys I had taken. "We know where the bodies are buried. Now we just need to wait for them to hand us the shovel. We are going to turn the board around. Evelyn, we are going to make sure that if anyone goes down, it isn't you, and it isn't Lucas." The game changed on a rainy Tuesday when Rosa finally got a call back from her old contact in the fraud division. We met at my kitchen table, the air smelling of the pot of coffee I had been brewing since dawn. Rosa looked grim. "It is worse than we thought." "Evelyn," Rosa said, keeping her voice low. "Atlas Recovery Group is a shell. It connects back to a syndicate in Cleveland. These aren't bankers. They are the kind of people who break knees first and ask for payment second. If Lucas owes them money, he is not just in debt, he is in danger." That afternoon, Lucas stopped by my house to drop off some groceries, a rare gesture of guilt. He looked exhausted, falling asleep on my sofa within 10 minutes. While he snored, a sound that used to comfort me when he was a baby. I picked up his phone. I guessed his passcode easily. It was still his father's birthday. I scrolled to the messages. There was a string of texts from a blocked number. Payment late. Interest doubled. "We know where the wife works. Do not make us come to the house. Lucas. The family pays if you don't." My hand trembled. He was reading these every day. He was living with a gun to his head, and he had convinced himself that the only way to unload it was to trigger a payout. But the real twist came 2 days later. I was downtown, heading to the pharmacy, when I saw Madison's car parked outside a small cafe. I don't know why, but I pulled my coat collar up and went inside, sitting in a booth behind a large decorative plant. Madison was there with a woman I did not recognize. She was not the cold, calculating villain I had painted in my head. She was weeping. "I can't take it anymore." "Sarah." Madison sobbed into a napkin. "He keeps saying it is the only way. He says his heart is going to give out anyway, so we might as well use it to clear the slate. I feel like I am living with a ghost. I don't want him to die. But these men. Lucas says they will hurt us if we don't pay. I am just so scared." I sat there, stunned. I had thought Madison was the architect, pushing my son toward the grave for a payday, but looking at her shaking shoulders, I realized the truth was far more tragic. This was a suicide pact born of terror. Lucas had convinced her that his death was a noble sacrifice, a financial strategy to save her from the wolves. They were not just greedy, they were stupid and terrified. But that did not make me forgive them. In fact, it made my resolve harder, like steel tempered in fire. My son had decided his life was worth less than a ledger balance. My daughter-in-law had agreed to cash the check. I left the cafe without them seeing me. I was done being the worried mother. If they wanted to play games with life and death, I would change the rules. I would make his death worthless. The next morning, I initiated the first strike. I went to the county clerk. I still held the deed to a small, forgotten plot of land Thomas had bought 30 years ago on the edge of town. It was not worth millions, but it was worth enough. I transferred the title into an irrevocable trust designated for future grandchildren, with a court-appointed executor. I structured it so that if Lucas died within 5 years, any assets flowing from his estate would be frozen and diverted into this trust, untouchable by Madison or any creditor. Then, I started collecting the keys. I already had the lake house key. I had the key to the storage unit, but I needed more. I needed to control every door they thought they had locked. I visited Northline Transit during lunch, claiming I needed to drop off Lucas's heart medication that he had forgotten. While the receptionist called him, I slipped into the hallway where the lockers were. Rosa had told me how to pick a simple cam lock with a paperclip. It took me 10 seconds to open Lucas's locker. Inside, I found a spare key to his home office file cabinet. I took it. 2 days later, I went back to Gordon Pike's office. I told the secretary I had left my reading glasses in the conference room during our last meeting. She let me in, the moment she turned her back. I opened the drawer where I knew Gordon kept the master keys for his client files. I took the impression of the key to the Harper file in a piece of modelling clay I had hidden in my palm, a trick Rosa taught me. I would have a copy made by noon that evening. I sat on my floor, the metal keys spread out before me on the rug. To anyone else, they were just scraps of brass and steel. But to me, they were the combination to a prison cell I was about to build around my son and his wife. You want to sell your life for money, Lucas, I whispered to the empty room. Let's see what happens when the bank is closed. I picked up the keys, one by one, and dropped them into my pocket. The weight felt good. It felt like power. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was invite them to dinner. I set the dining table with the precision of an executioner preparing the gallows. I used the good china, the plates Thomas and I had bought for our 10th anniversary, but the real centerpieces were not the roast chicken or the glazed carrots. Placed deliberately between the salt and pepper shakers were 3 thick envelopes, a stack of documents stamped with the Liberty Crown Bank logo, and a small, polished mahogany box with a brass lock. When Lucas and Madison arrived, the air in the room instantly grew heavy. I had told them I wanted to discuss rewriting my will to make things clear before it is too late. A phrase I knew would bait their desperation. They sat down, their eyes darting from the food to the papers. Madison smoothed her skirt, her knuckles white. Lucas looked like a man walking to the electric chair, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. I have been thinking a lot about the future, I said, pouring wine into their glasses. I am getting old. My back hurts more every day. I don't want to be a burden to you two. So, I decided to consolidate everything I have left, the accounts, the hidden savings Thomas never told anyone about. Everything. I saw Lucas's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. Mom. Lucas started, his voice cracking. You don't have to do this. We are fine. We are managing. Are you? I asked, slicing into the meat. Because I would hate to think of you struggling when the solution is sitting right here in this box. Madison's eyes locked onto the small wooden box. She tried to feign disinterest, picking up her fork, but her hand was trembling. It is good to be prepared. Evelyn? Madison said, her voice tight. What? What exactly is in the box I stopped eating? I wiped my mouth with a napkin and slowly reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a heavy, jangling bunch of keys. It was a grotesque collection of metal, old and new, brass and steel, all bound together on a single iron ring. I let them drop. The sound of metal hitting the solid oak table was loud, violent even. It rang through the silence like a gunshot. Clang. Lucas flinched. Madison jumped in her seat. "These," I said, pointing a finger at the pile, "are the answers?" I separated one key with my fingernail. It was the tarnished brass key to the lake house. "This one," I said, my voice steady and cold, "opens the back door of the lake house in Michigan. The one you thought was secure. Inside the safe, in the master bedroom, I found the new mortgage papers." I moved my finger to the small silver key. "This one opens Unit B24 at Lockridge Storage. I have seen the boxes. Lucas, I know about the $1.2 million you owe." Lucas turned a shade of grey I had never seen on a living human being. Madison let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "And this one," I said, tapping a small black key, "opens a safety deposit box I rented yesterday. Inside that box is a flash drive containing copies of every text message from Atlas Recovery Group, every bank transfer, and a recorded conversation I had with my doctor about the strange, fluctuating levels of medication in Lucas's blood work." The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my son, and for the first time in months, he looked back at me, his eyes wide with terror. "I know about Atlas," I continued, leaning forward. "I know about the West Prairie Mutual policy. And I know that one of you has been tampering with the heart medication. I just don't know if it is murder or suicide." Lucas shattered. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently. I did it." Lucas sobbed, his voice muffled by his palms. "I started skipping doses. I cut the pills in half. It was the only way. If I die of a heart attack, the insurance pays. It wipes the debt. Madison gets the house. You get to be safe. I am worth more dead. Mom, I am just a walking debt. Oh, God." Lucas Madison screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I told you to stop. I told you I couldn't take it anymore. Every time you took those pills, I felt like I was watching you drink poison, but you let him do it," I said, my voice cutting through their hysteria like a razor. "You knew. You watched him fade, and you waited for the check." I stood up, looming over them. "Listen to me very carefully," I said. "I have sent copies of every document, every photo, and a sworn affidavit to a lawyer in Columbus and to my friend Rosa. If Lucas dies within the next 2 years from a heart attack, a car accident, or a slip in the shower, those envelopes will be opened. The insurance company will be notified of fraud. The police will be notified of assisted suicide and conspiracy. You will go to federal prison, Madison. And Lucas, you will die, leaving behind a legacy of shame, not money." Lucas looked up, his face wet with tears, looking like a frightened child. "Mom, what do we do? They will kill us." I pushed the bunch of keys into the center of the table, right next to the locked box. "You have a choice," I said. "You can use these keys to keep locking yourselves in this prison of lies until it kills you. Or you can take them and open a new door. I have a plan. But it requires you to trust me more than you trust your fear." I turned to leave the room, pausing at the doorway. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I commanded. Meet me at Liberty Crown Bank. I will show you what is behind the locks. Bring the keys, and bring your spine. Lucas, you are going to need it. The conference room at Liberty Crown Bank was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of floor wax. I sat at the head of the mahogany table. To my left sat Lucas and Madison, looking like two children called into the principal's office. Across from them sat Eliza Monroe, the sharp-eyed young attorney I had hired, and Mr. Henderson, a senior risk assessor from West Prairie Mutual, whom I had quietly invited to join us. I reached into my purse and pulled out the heavy bunch of keys. I placed them in the center of the table. Then, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. I set it down right next to the keys. "This," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the small room, "is a recording of our dinner conversation last night. It includes a very clear admission of intent to manipulate a life insurance claim." Lucas turned a shade of pale that reminded me of wet dough. Madison stared at the drive, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Eliza Monroe leaned forward, opening a folder. "Based on the asset transfers you executed, the timing of the new policy, and the audio evidence on this drive," Eliza said, her tone professional and lethal. "If Lucas were to die any time soon, West Prairie Mutual would not be cutting a check. They would be calling the police. It is a textbook case of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Madison, given your role in managing his medication, you would likely be looking at a charge of assisted suicide or manslaughter." Mr. Henderson nodded, his face devoid of sympathy. "We do not pay out for self-inflicted health crises," he said flatly. "If there is even a hint that you are worsening your condition to trigger a payout, we freeze the policy and hand the file to the federal authorities. You would get $0, and you would go to prison." Madison gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. But we have nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The debt. They will kill us." "Not necessarily," I said. I slid a thick document across the table. "This is a deed to a trust," I explained. "I have liquidated the assets Thomas left behind that you didn't know about. The bonds, the old land plot. It is a significant amount. But it is locked in a trust for my future grandchildren. You two are named as guardians, which means you can look at the money, but you cannot touch a single cent of the principal. It is there to ensure the next generation survives your mistakes. You went behind our backs," Madison hissed, her eyes flashing with a sudden spark of anger. "That is our family money." "It was my money," I shot back. "And now, it is safe from you." Lucas put his head on the table. "Mom, I just wanted to fix it. I messed up. I thought if I died, I could fix it." "You don't fix it by dying," I said, my voice hard. "You fix it by living long enough to pay." I slid the final envelope across the table. It landed in front of Madison. Inside that envelope is a plea deal. I said, "Rosa and I went to the district attorney. We handed over the information on Atlas Recovery Group. They have been trying to build a RICO case against that syndicate for 5 years. They need a witness. They need someone on the inside who can testify about the threats and the interest rates." Lucas looked up, his eyes wide. "You want me to testify against them?" "If you agree to be a witness," I said. "The state will put you in protective custody during the trial. They will negotiate the debt down to the legal principal. You will have to sell the big house. You will have to sell the cars. You will have to work real jobs to pay off what is left. But you will be alive, and you won't be in jail. Madison looked at the papers, then at Lucas, and finally at me. She realized the trap had closed. The easy way out the $2 million, the tragic Widow Act, was gone. The only road left was hard, unglamorous survival under the thumb of the law. "It is over," I said, standing up. I gathered the bunch of keys into my hand. I pulled 2 off the ring, the tarnished brass key to the lake house and the silver key to the storage unit, and tossed them onto the table. They clattered loudly. These 2 keys open places full of debt, old furniture, and bad memories. I said, "I don't need them anymore. You can keep them, or you can throw them in the river. But from today on, there are no keys that open a shortcut to easy money. Not in this family." I turned my back on them. I did not hug my son. I did not say goodbye. I walked out of the glass doors of the conference room, clutching the USB drive in my hand. It was my insurance policy now. As long as I held it, they would walk the line. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, silencing their sobs. I walked across the marble lobby, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the cold stone. I had lost the version of the family I thought I had, but I had saved my son's life, even if he hated me for it. I pushed open the heavy front doors of the bank and stepped out into the bright, blinding sunlight of a new day. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment down below and tell me what city or country you are in. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next one.